Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Invertebrate Investigations. My name is Kayla. I'm your host, and this month we are talking all about jumping spiders. A coworker of mine once described jumping spiders as gateway spiders, because if you're not so sure if you like spiders or not, they are a really good place to start, because they're very cute. They're very small, and they are harmless to humans as well, and you can find them pretty much everywhere. So let's go ahead and get into it. I've got a lot of content to cover in just 15 minutes. So jumping spiders are in the spider family Salticidae. Um, and they are the most diverse group of spiders in the world. There are just over 7,000 described species that we've discovered anyway. They can be found all over the world. They are all fairly small. They don't usually get much bigger than the tip of your finger, so they can quite comfortably just sit in your hand. They come in all sorts of colors and patterns. They can be rather plain. They can be super, super bright, or kind of a mix of both. Usually the males are very vibrant and the females are a little bit plainer. Just like birds, because they do have fairly elaborate courtship rituals. But regardless of where you're finding them or where you're looking at them, they're all going to be fairly similar. They're going to have that small size, usually very fuzzy or fluffy. They're all ambush hunters, so they don't use their silk to catch food. Instead, they rely on their hunting prowess. And they have extremely large eyes, those big eyes that look like something out of a Disney animated film. They are just adorable. And they have some of the best vision of any arthropod that we know of. So let's get started. Again, if you're ever unsure if you've got a jumping spider, if you can see those eyes, those huge eyes that take up pretty much their whole head, that's how you know you've got a jumper. And of course, they are known for their athletic ability, their jumping. That is how they hunt. They will use those large eyes to calibrate the distance between them and their prey, and then they use their little legs to kind of power themselves off. They can jump several lengths of their own body, and they don't need a running start either. So I did have a request from a few young scientists I met with on Monday to discuss how their legs work. And so catching them on film jumping can be difficult because they're so fast. They, just boing right out of camera sight before you can even see them. But they are not using so much muscles like, say, a grasshopper would. They instead relying on the way that their legs move. So I'm going to show a tarantula here because they move really slow. It's easy to see. They use hydraulic power to move their limbs. They don't have blood quite like we do. It's instead called hemolymph. But they are using blood pressure to move those limbs. So if we go in and watch this again. So as this tarantula right here, she lifts a leg, she's pumping blood into that limb so that she can extend it, and then using retractor muscles to bring it back. So jumping spiders are just doing this on a much larger scale. Even though they're so much smaller, they will very, very quickly pump fluid into their back legs, and that is what gives them that lift off. And because they're so small and they're so light, they are able to kind of just launch themselves at their prey. They're also fairly accurate because they've got really good eyesight. So in addition to being quite the little athletes and the quite little hunters, they are also fluffy. They're so fuzzy. This is part of what makes them so adorable. Again, usually they have those bright colors as well. Humans tend to like that. We like colorful things, and we like fuzzy things. And so these little hairs on their body are called setae. All spiders have them, just they're not always incredibly visible. So again, you think like a tarantula, they are also very fluffy. They have very prominent setae. But something like an orb weaver or a black widow, they do still have those setae on their body. They're just not going to be quite as prominent. So jumping spiders use their setae for sensing things around them, just in the same way a cat uses their whiskers. But they are also able to use these hairs kind of like ears. almost. They can listen with the hairs on their bodies. So it's similar to how human ears work, right? We have little tiny hairs in our ears that help pick up the vibrations from sound waves and then helps our eardrum interpret it. And then our brain goes through and, lets us know what the sound is. It's very similar with jumping spiders, except they're using their whole body. So we don't really understand like how they perceive the world, what that can sound like. I would imagine it would be similar to if you're riding in the car with the radio turned like all the way up and you can feel the bass, right? It's a physical sensation. You can feel that. So I imagine that sound for them feels very similar to that physical sensation. But we don't really know. It's very hard to study, and as of yet, we have not figured out how to communicate with them, despite the fact that they are very intelligent. They're very bright spiders. They can be trained even. So very intelligent as far as arthropods go, but still have some mysteries on how they experience the world. All right, and of course, we cannot talk about jumping spiders without talking about these incredible eyes. They have the largest eye to body ratio of any spider, potentially any arthropod. I'm not sure. There might be a few things in the ocean that have larger eyes. But these incredible eyes are what allow them to hunt. So most spiders don't have great eyesight. They don't rely on their eyesight to help them. They instead use their silk and their setae on their bodies to help them kind of feel their way around. But jumpers, they have great eyesight. And so these two primary eyes, they do in fact have color vision. And their eyes are kind of very long and tube shaped. If you were to maybe x-ray a little tiny spider, those eyes would be almost like a tube. And it's kind of similar to if you strapped binoculars to your face. So whichever direction you are pointing, you can see really, really well through those binoculars. However, there is that issue of you don't have any peripheral vision. You can't see to the sides. Well, jumping spiders, they've got 8 eyes, so that's how they can solve that problem. So there are some auxiliary eyes kind of right here, and then their eyes, the rest of their eyes kind of wrap around the back of their head. So they can see in all directions. The vision isn't quite as good on these eyes on the sides of their head, but it is able to at least alert them to motion, and then they turn their bodies. And so they're able to turn and point those really, really strong eyes at whatever it is they're looking at. And so because their eyes are so large, it has led to some really, really interesting research. There was a 2022 study that was looking at jumping spiders, and we were able to observe them while they were sleeping and learn that they go through a rapid eye movement like stage while they are sleeping. So in humans, the REM sleep stage is when we are dreaming. So there is no way for us to scientifically prove that jumping spiders are able to dream, are capable of dreaming. However, this does suggest that potentially it's possible. Again, we would have to figure out a way to communicate with them before we ever be able to prove it, but they do at least go into that rapid eye movement stage. So that does suggest that dreaming is at least a possibility. They also, when they sleep, they make these cute little silk like sleeping bags, and they'll tuck themselves in. So they don't typically have like a set web. They tend to move around a fair bit, but when they're bedding down for the evening, to be safe, they'll kind of wrap themselves in a little silk sleeping bag, and they're just cute. So all of these things together are kind of what makes jumping spiders so lovable and so likable. Their large eyes mean that they can perceive us. And if you've ever interacted with one, you'll know that they interact with you. They look at you. They will turn their heads. They, even kind of cock their heads like a dog. And you can see that, that indication of intelligence. You can see, that they're thinking about you, that they're examining you, that they're trying to figure out what you are. So I always recommend, if you are someone who is afraid of spiders and you're wanting to conquer that fear, starting with jumpers is a really good place to start because, again, they're small. They are not harmful to humans. They do have venom, but the venom is very mild. It's not, even if they can puncture your skin with their little tiny fangs. It's not going to be anything serious. Um, they're fluffy, they're colorful, and again, those big eyes, it helps us identify with them. Humans are extremely visually driven animals as well. We rely on our eyesight very much, and so I think it's easier for us to interact with and connect with animals that also rely on their vision to help them get around. People also do keep them as pets. I do recommend them if you are wanting to get into spider keeping. I don't necessarily recommend starting with a tarantula. Tarantulas can be a lot of fun. They can be a great pet. But they are a little more complicated to take care of. So jumping spiders, are fairly easy to care for. They don't have a whole lot of needs, and they also don't live as long as a tarantula would. That is sad, of course, if you're keeping one as a pet. But it also, if you get into it and you're like, I don't really care for keeping spiders, you're not stuck with that tarantula for the next 30 years, right? It's a much smaller commitment. They also are a really good pet if your children are interested in spiders. I still would recommend at least middle school and up ages to keep something like a spider. But they can be a really, really kind of great introduction to keeping invertebrates. You can find them all over the world, right? They are found on, I think, every continent except for Antarctica, including in places where you wouldn't expect to find them. There are species that live in the Himalayan mountains in Nepal, which is not somewhere you would expect to see some spiders. And here in the United States, we have quite a few bold jumpers, regal jumpers, zebra jumpers, which have those very distinctive stripes. Here in Colorado, we have Apache jumpers, which have red markings or coloration on their backs, and they're actually velvet ant mimics. So they are just a truly wondrous little animals. If you have a chance to interact with one, I highly recommend that you do. You don't have to touch them. You don't have to pick them up or anything like that. You can just watch them. Even just watching them groom themselves or go about their normal spider business can be very rewarding and is a great way to kind of start conquering that spider fear. All right, let me take a look, see if we've got any questions in the chat. I don't think so. Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. Hope you enjoyed this very, very brief introduction to jumping spiders. If you are wanting to do some more research, I highly recommend that. You can find a lot of guides based on your area to help you identify them. One thing to keep in mind, though, that makes it a little more complicated is, again, usually the males and the females have different coloration. So that can make it a little more complicated to identify them. But again, you can find them everywhere. Here in our gardens at Butterfly Pavilion, I've seen quite a few out there, especially in the milkweed plants. They're out there hunting, waiting to catch some bugs. All right, so next month we will be back on August 13th at 11 a.m. and we will be going over Octopus 101. So we'll be talking about these incredible cephalopods, their weird little bodies, and their wickedly smart brains. So thank you all so much for joining me, and I hope to see you next